Ahead on NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman.
On this week's edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman, the results of the National Beef Quality Audit, what the lead researchers are saying about the state of our industry and our end product. NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman starts now.
And now, NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman with host Kevin Oxner.
Hello and welcome to this week's special edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. I'm Kevin Oxner. Thanks for joining us. Topping this week's cattle industry news, the just released results of the National Beef Quality Audit. Every 5 years, the Beef Checkoff funds a nationwide study that looks at the state of our industry and the product we produce. The three-phase Checkoff funded program took nearly a year to complete, and now we can confirm our industry is in a state of continuous improvement. And joining me in the studio to share more information on that continuous improvement, Dr. John Patterson, Executive Director of Producer Education for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Dr. Keith Belk, he's one of the lead investigators and from Colorado State University. Dr. Jeff Saville, he's from Texas A&M University and also one of the lead investigators. And finally, Dr. Jason Ahola, one of the lead investigators also from Colorado State University. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming to the show.
Thank you.
Now, before we get into our conversation, we want to hear from Dr. Tom Field. He's now with the University of Nebraska and was a guiding force as the audit was conducted. Dr. Field says research like this is key to the future of our industry.
There are three big things we have to do as an industry. Number one, we must deliver eating satisfaction every single time to our consumer. Secondly, we need to absolutely protect, defend, promote, and enhance the product integrity of beef. In other words, all those composite traits that influence whether a consumer likes the product, trusts the product, and trusts the process that created the product, we must enhance those at every chance we get. And the third active step for us as an industry is to very proactively and relentlessly tell the beef story so that people can connect to what it is that we're doing.
Well, let's get down to our discussion, and Dr. Patterson, I want to start with you. You know, the audit, I understand, has been conducted every 5 years since 1991. Why is it that the industry believes this is so important?
Well, we believe that you can't make progress unless you can measure where we are or where we have been. Mm-hmm. And so this audit is divided into two major parts. One is we go out and do a lot of measurements in the industry. Mm-hmm. The second part of that is we bring all that data together and then bring in the experts from all phases of the industry and say, guys, here's the data. Help us develop a strategy from the results that you've seen presented over about a 2.5 day. And so once you get that strategy, then you develop a 5-year plan on how do we continue to make improvement in the beef cattle industry.
Very good. I'm anxious to get into some of that data you're referencing, but before we do, there is a lot of good information in the audit itself. But tell us, who funds it? How is this project funded every 5 years?
We could not have accomplished what we've done in this last year without the funding of the Beef Checkoff, and so this research project comes directly from the Checkoff.
Now, Dr. Belk, you've been involved in these in the past, but tell us how your role was maybe a little different this time.
Well, Colorado State University is responsible for coordinating phase 1 of the National Beef Quality Audit, which is the face-to-face interviews. Mm-hmm. Face-to-face interviews of some form or fashion of them have been conducted at each of the National Beef Quality Audits. But for the first time in this 2011 National Beef Quality Audit, we added a economic experiment on top of the face-to-face interviews so that when we interviewed various sectors of the industry, which included feeders, packers, retailers, distributors, and wholesalers, and food service companies, and also government and allied industries, that when we returned with the results, that we could actually quantify the things that they said that were important.
Very good. We'll look forward to learning more about that. And Jeff, tell us a little bit about the role and responsibility of you and your team at Texas A&M.
We did the what's known as phase 2, which is to go into the plants and actually measure various traits. And so we went to packing facilities around the country, looked at about 18,000 cattle carcasses and byproducts on the harvest floor to assess those characteristics. In the cooler, looked at about 9,000 carcasses to look at quality grade, yield grade, and branded programs and other kinds of measures. And then unique this year, we had the opportunity to receive instrument grading information where we were able to have 2.4 million carcasses to evaluate. So quite a good snapshot of what's going on in the industry today.
Now, Jason, producers haven't been that involved in this audit in years past. How did that change this year?
Yeah, this audit was the first audit to have a phase 3, which was a survey of producers to determine how they might influence quality of beef. So we went out and surveyed producers from the seed stock, commercial cow-calf, stocker operating segments, in addition to the dairy segment, to try to quantify how they might influence beef quality. And some of that was asking them, what did quality mean to them? And some of it was, how do you feel like you influence quality? We also tried to track how much they participated in beef quality assurance programs. And ultimately what we're trying to do is establish a benchmark to be able to compare results from this audit with future audits.
And Jeff, you mentioned the number of data points. How does the depth of this year's audit compare to previous?
Well, without question, looking at all the information that my colleagues have talked about, plus the addition of the instrument grading, we've got the greatest source of information that we've ever have had in any of the quality audits to be able to answer some of the questions that are so key to cattle producers.
Well, thanks, gentlemen, for what's shaping up to be a really interesting discussion. And we're not done yet. Next, we'll take a look at how the Checkoff-funded beef quality audit is helping improve results from pasture to plate. We'll be right back.
Consumers count on America's cattlemen to deliver quality beef every time. So in your daily work to raise cattle, keep quality top of mind in everything you do, in the care, feeding, and handling of your animals. You can be a part of a national program that provides sound, proven guidelines for beef cattle production that will establish you as a leader and responsible stockman. Beef Quality Assurance, or BQA, is a national program funded by the Beef Checkoff that can help you strengthen your operation, improve cattle care, drive more value to the bottom line, and increase consumer confidence in the quality of America's beef. Producers across the nation have embraced the BQA program because of their commitment to be the world's best producers of beef, and because assuring beef quality is our job, not someone else's. Find out how you can become BQA certified. Visit the website bqa.org.
They're out there, lurking on your pasture, just waiting to infect your cattle as they graze. Cattle worms cost you money, but a Safeguard strategic deworming program allows you to deworm your cattle and lower worm burdens on your pasture, resulting in improved pregnancy rates and heavier calf weights. Plus, there's a Safeguard form for every operation, so start killing parasites where they lurk. Talk to your animal health provider today about a Safeguard strategic dewormer program. Safeguard. Think strategically. Act decisively.
Here's what producers are saying about Progressive Cattleman Magazine, the beef industry resource.
I recommend that anyone who's serious in the beef industry about improving their operations, efficiency, and profitability subscribe to Progressive Cattleman.
There's articles, there's the advertisements are very well done, and it's kind of a quick and concise look at where the cattle industry is on that day.
Now, we find that it's a go-to must-read for us each and every month.
Subscribe today at progressivecattle.com.
Welcome back. We're talking about the results of the National Beef Quality Audit, and we're here with the experts. Let's return to our discussion. Now, Keith, there are a lot of differences from one end of the beef supply chain to the other, and one of those is the language each one of us uses. Now, how was that manifested in this year's audit?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, for the first time we were able to quantify in the phase one of the National Beef Quality Audit, the responses to the face-to-face interviews. One of the questions that we asked this time around was, how do you define various attributes associated with beef quality? And we sort of divided that up into 7 categories of quality, if you will. We had food safety, we had beef eating satisfaction, how and where the cattle were raised, lean, fat, and bone, or carcass composition, weight and size, genetics, and then visual characteristics. And these buckets of quality categories, they applied regardless of whether you were a cattle feeder or you were a retailer or a food service operator. You could define these categories however you wanted. And what we found is that some of the definitions for those categories were vastly different from each other. And so, for example, the quality category, how and where the cattle were raised, we had extremely different answers depending on whether you were a cattle feeder versus a retailer versus a food service operator versus a packer. And so that was where some of the disparity in definitions associated with beef quality came in.
Well, does that really matter?
I think it's important because it indicates to us that there is a discontinuity in how we communicate up and down the supply chain of the beef industry. So, for example, as you move closer to the consumers, then things that were more important to retailers and food service operators were sort of social type of issues, animal well-being, those types of topics. As you work back upstream in the supply chain, cattle feeders, for example, I think things like vaccination, health history, health management practices were more important. And so things change depending on where you were in the supply chain. And that indicates to us that there's a difference in economic signals that perhaps are being passed up and down the chain. For example, when it comes to carcass weight, we know that carcass weight has continued to increase for the last 100 years, basically. I don't think there's any consumers that are going into grocery stores and asking the grocery merchandiser to provide bigger steaks for them. So the economic signal for larger cattle is not coming probably from consumers. And so you have to wonder, where is that being introduced into the marketing chain? Because there certainly is an economic signal for cattle producers to raise bigger cattle.
That's interesting. Jeff, tell us about the findings about quality from a packing plant perspective.
Well, one of the things I want to share with you and with the audience is the level of bruising that we found this time. In 2005, in the quality audit, we had 64.8% of the carcasses that had no bruises. This year, in 2011, it was to 77%, so a great increase in the number of cattle without bruises. And I think it's a tribute to the work that the cattle producers are doing and all the attention that's been paid to animal handling and trucking and offloading and things like that that are making a big difference in the number of bruises that cattle have today.
That's great news.
Good.
Jason, you told us that you engaged producers in a new and unique way in this year's audit. How do they perceive quality?
Yeah, we asked them, when you hear the term quality relative to the beef industry, what does that mean to you? And the 2 answers that came to the top were raising cattle and calves that are healthy, and also producing beef that is safe and wholesome. So it's pretty clear that producers equate these 2 concepts with quality, and up until this point we really didn't have a great idea of what they thought quality was.
So do producers believe they can make a difference in terms of quality?
Yeah, we actually asked them further, how do you think you influence quality? And 96% of them said that they actively do something on their farm or ranch to influence quality. And the number 1 reason was preventative health care, such as vaccines, as a way of trying to proactively influence quality in the beef chain. And we also found out that 9 out of 10 producers that responded to the survey have a relationship with their veterinarian related to the use of animal health products. We call that a veterinary client-patient relationship as a technical term, but it's a great way to make sure you are properly using preventative health care and also properly using health treatments for animals that might be sick. So a lot of producers are being very proactive with health care as it impacts quality.
So Jason, can the quality improvements we see at the packing plant be attributed to the improvements that producers have made?
Yeah, I think we could actually give quite a bit of credit to the Beef Quality Assurance Program for some of the improvements. One of the examples would be injection site lesions. And what we found in our survey was that currently 87% of producers choose to give an injection in the neck region, front of the shoulder of an animal, versus historically it tended to be in the rear of an animal and devalued some cuts. And we also found that 84% of producers would prefer using a subcutaneous method under the skin rather than intramuscular, again, trying to avoid causing injection site lesions. So some really big improvements on injection sites that we can truly say producers have changed the way they're doing things.
That is encouraging. So just how widespread is BQA?
Well, that is one of the questions we directly asked. We said, have you ever been to a meeting that talked about how to reduce quality defects? And 78% of producers said that they had attended such a meeting. And then we asked, have you ever heard of beef quality assurance? And 87% of producers indicated that they had heard of that. We asked those, just the people that's responded yes to that question, have you ever gone through a beef quality assurance training meeting? And 71% said that. So ultimately, of all the people that took our survey, 43% were beef quality assurance certified. So that's a huge number of producers out in the country.
Dr. Patterson, you and your team at NCBA lead the Chekhov-funded BQA program, and I'm interested, how have you been able to make this information on animal handling techniques so available to so many people around the country, and what impact has it had?
Well, it's had a great impact of what you don't see in the audit now, injection site blemishes, bruises, those kinds of issues. How did we get that accomplished? We got that accomplished by going through our state BQA coordinators, their educators, the state beef councils, their educators, the state cattlemen's organizations, the guys that are the state beef specialists. They all teach proper BQA protocols and procedures. In addition to that, we've got a great communications team that puts the information out nationally, as well as beginning to use things like Facebook and webinars. So we think we've got a good communications program to get this information out.
And you can get more information on the beef quality audit by visiting bqa.org. We're so excited to be bringing the results of the National Beef Quality Audit to our audience. Our discussion continues right after this.
Preventing cattle pink eye is as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1. Vaccinate your animals with Piligard Pink Eye Tri-View to provide pink eye fighting antibodies in the tears that bathe the eye. Broad spectrum protection that cross-reacts with 103 different strains of pink eye causing bacteria. 2. Stop the flies that spread pink eye bacteria throughout the herd. Apply double barrel VP ear tags and Ultra Boss Pour-On for up to 5 months of face fly and horn fly control. 3. Manage the environment to reduce damage to the animal's eye from seed heads, pollen, and UV light, irritants that increase the risk of pink eye infection. With the right tools, preventing pink eye is as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Get your boots on the bay for the 2013 Annual Convention and NCBA Trade Show. Join me, J.D. Alexander, for Boots on the Bay as we attend important industry meetings and kick back for some fun with our fellow cattlemen and women at the Cattlemen's Beach Party featuring the Beach Boys. You won't want to miss the Hot Havana Nights after party with the Bellamy Brothers. For more information, visit beefusa.org. So pack up your boots. I'll see you in Tampa Bay.
Workin' Ranch Magazine savvies the challenges and rewards of those who make their living on the ranch. From pretty loops in the Brandon pen to cold nights calving heifers, we cover the real deal. Subscribe today. Just go online to workinranchmag.com or give us a call. We'll fix you right up. You can also visit us in person at the NCBA convention in Tampa. Working Ranch, your magazine.
The secret to finding more buyers for your cattle is no longer a secret. CattleExchange.com is like no other site. It brings the greater ease of use, detailed information, and searchability found in sites like Cars.com and Autotrader.com to the cattle industry. Upload photos and video to attract more buyers and share greater detail in your listing. Cattle buyers and sellers are connecting in ways they never imagined. Go to www.cattle-exchange.com and discover the secret to better selling.
Welcome back to this very special edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. We're with the lead investigators of this year's beef quality audit, and we're talking about the results. Keith, I want to begin this segment with you and talk specifically about those face-to-face interviews you did. After all those interviews, what are some of the key findings?
We performed a procedure in this National Beef Quality Audit that's referred to as best-worst scaling. And best-worst scaling is just a technique where you can prioritize or arrange in terms of priority a long list of attributes. And so we did that with everybody that we interviewed in phase one. And what we learned across all of the sectors of the industry, that food safety and eating satisfaction were the most important criteria for quality that people expect in the beef supply chain. And so they became extremely important. The interesting thing about both of those quality categories is that when we asked the interviewees what were the strengths and the weaknesses of the beef industry currently, they listed both of those categories as both the strength and as a weakness. And so what we think is that we've made progress in both food safety and eating satisfaction, but we need to continue that progress because they're still such important demand drivers for the industry.
Well, let's talk about eating satisfaction. What did they tell you in terms of the components that make up eating satisfaction, in their opinion?
It was actually quite interesting. When we asked them to define what the term eating satisfaction meant to them, of course, by far and away, most of the companies that were interviewed said, well, tenderness and taste is most important. But interestingly enough, for the first time, those sectors of the industry that are closest to the consumer, so the food service portion of the industry and the retailers, they said that now flavor is the most important criteria for eating satisfaction. And so as we move forward, we need to not forget the importance of flavor and taste to the industry.
Very interesting. Jeff, what other quality improvements did you find?
Well, it's interesting in our phase two information when we looked at the amount of quality grading and the different grades, we found that the percent prime and choice was the highest it's been during the history of the quality audits. In fact, it was 61.1% this year compared to 5 years ago. Then in the 2005 audit, it was 54.5%. So pretty dramatic increase in percent choice and prime. The other thing that's interesting is how many of those carcasses really fit the target. And when we've asked people to identify what's the target to them, they'll say it's, what percent of them are prime, choice, select, yield grades 1, 2, and 3. And so we went from 81.7% all the way up to 85.1%. So greater number of them are fitting the targets for the industry from quality, but even a greater number of them are fitting for both quality and composition.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, the industry has really just implemented instrument grading since the last quality audit. And so what did this year's BQA audit tell us about the implementation of instrument grading?
Well, you remember at the beginning stated that we had carcass measures for like 8,000 carcasses actually in the plant, but then we have 2.4 million observations from the instruments that are used also in the plants. And what we found was how close those measurements were. in the yield grade and the marbling score and the ribeye area, how close they were. They were almost interchangeable, which to our team, we feel like that gives us great confidence that either system works well to identify the quality and yield characteristics that are so important to the beef industry.
Now, Jason, Keith talked a lot about food safety as well. What role do producers play in food safety?
Well, one of the things we found out is the importance of low-stress cattle handling to producers. There's a lot of evidence out there that low-stress cattle handling is conducive to production of high-quality beef, and cattle producers told us basically the same thing in terms of what they feel their methods are for influencing the quality of beef. As we talked earlier, one of them is producing healthy cattle. The other one was the use of low-stress animal handling and stockmanship skills. And so producers were basically saying to us it's very important to them to influence quality by using some of these new techniques. We also asked them when they're working cattle or processing cattle, do they use a electric prod as their primary driving tool? And over 98% of producers said that they did not. So there's very, very little use of electric prods, and producers are really focused on low-stress cattle handling techniques.
And is this an improvement?
That's a good question, because we have not asked this of producers before, and there's really no data from historical records. But low-stress cattle handling has become a mainstay of beef quality assurance training, and we would only assume that has improved over time.
Jeff, after all the extensive data you've collected at the packing plant level and all your experience, I mean, was there one thing that kind of surprised you?
Well, one of the things that we found that was so important to us, or we felt like was important, was the number of cattle that came to the plant with some sort of identification. And we found that we had over 97% of the carcasses or the cattle coming in that had some form of identification. But what's unique this year compared to the previous time was the number of them that had true individual information. And in fact, in 2005, we had 3.5% of the cattle had electronic ear tags. This time we had 20.1%. And then if you take the individual visual tags, just the normal tags that have individual numbers, that number increased from 38.7% all the way to 50.6%. And if you do that combination, we're going from roughly about 40% of the animals with really good individual identification all the way up to 70%.
What would you suspect is driving that kind of increase?
We feel like the demand for age and source verified cattle, the marketplace is demanding more knowledge about where the animals have come from to meet various requirements, export requirements for Japan and places like this. And so really, if you look, the domestic and foreign markets are demanding more knowledge about where the cattle are coming from. And I think we see it reflected in the number of cattle that are coming through the system that have individual identification.
Dr. Holla, that information, I guess, would indicate that our industry has a pretty good start on identification. Did you find the same thing in your section of the audit?
Yeah, we asked producers if they use individual animal identification to track animals' withdrawal time for a pharmaceutical product use, and we found 78% of producers do in fact use individual identification for that purpose. And I think we would all agree that individual identification of an animal, such as an ear tag, is a great start in terms of record keeping and trying to track and document more information about cattle.
That's really encouraging news. So what does all this mean for the consumer? That's next on this week's edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Low financing, big implement bonuses. Now's the best time to save on the John Deere Compact Utility Tractor you've been waiting for. During the Green Fever sales event, get big cash off at your John Deere dealer with the purchase of qualifying implements. Plus, you can enter online right now to win a new John Deere 3E or 5E Series tractor at johndeere.com/greenfever. So get to your John Deere dealer today for the biggest deals of the year.
Beef Magazine is important to those of us in the industry. Being able to go back and maybe reread something several times to really understand how it relates to us and how we can use it in our operation becomes really important to us. The magazine becomes a good reference point in numerous areas, and most of the time the topics are pretty timely to what's going on in the industry.
It's Boots on the Bay, the 2013 NCBA Convention and Trade Show, a unique, fun environment for cattle industry members to come together and have some fun in the sun. And while you're there, check out Superior Livestock, your one source for all your livestock marketing needs. Superior has answers for marketing your livestock nationwide, including marketing cattle 24/7, 365 on Superior's country page. So shine your boots and we'll see you in Tampa. Spurs are optional.
It's the official monthly publication of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. The National Cattleman is produced exclusively for NCBA members and includes coverage of the news and events affecting our industry. From Capitol Hill to the far side of cattle country, the National Cattleman provides information NCBA members need. Every issue includes market analysis, feature stories, and practical management tips. Start receiving your copy of the National Cattleman. Call 866-USA-BEEF or go online to beefusa.org and join today.
Welcome back to this special edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. Let's return to the discussion with the lead investigators of the National Beef Quality Audit. Dr. Belk, we've been talking about what consumers are looking for in their beef, and we know that they want to feed their families a safe product and they want a great tasting product. But consumers are changing. I mean, what else did you learn from this audit about what they're looking for in the beef that they purchase?
Actually, that's very interesting. As I mentioned earlier, we had a chance to ask some of our interview questions that were sort of open-ended. Mm-hmm. And so we asked about strengths and we asked about weaknesses in the beef industry. And then we were able, because of how we did this, to quantify those responses. And one of the things that we found across the board, so regardless of which sector of the industry we're talking about, is that two things showed up on our radar in a big way. One of those is that we need to be more transparent in how we produce and how we market and how we generate beef from cattle. Mm-hmm. And the other is we need to do a better job of proactively telling our story to the general public. An awful lot of folks are several generations removed now from any sort of agricultural production. And as a consequence of that, we just need to do a better job of helping them understand what we do every day, how we produce the safe and high-quality beef that they have access to in their local stores.
And did the different segments express different opinions about that, or what did you learn there?
In this case, I think all of the sectors expressed the same opinion about this, that we need to do a better job of proactively telling our story.
So if we're going to do that, Jason, I mean, what role do producers play in helping consumers understand more about that, providing that information?
Yeah, well, producers, based on our survey, are doing a lot of things to intentionally influence quality. Like we said, animal health practices, low-stress handling. Unfortunately, cattle producers traditionally have not done a great job of documenting that or providing information beyond their segment in terms of what's been done. So I think this is a great opportunity for beef producers at any segment to begin to document, record keep, and identify the specific things that they're doing to their cattle throughout the time that they're on their operations, and passing that down the chain.
So Jeff, let me ask you a question. I mean, do you think this BQA audit provides a platform to tell at least part of that beef story?
Well, the interesting thing about the National Beef Quality Audit, because we have so many of the various sectors of the beef industry that are evaluated or measured or information from, everybody gets to learn more about another sector than their own. And so for, every 5 years, you kind of open up everybody's window of what are they doing. And so people further down the line have a better understanding of what's happening more at the production end. And those that are in the production sector get to learn more about the retail and food service sectors and find out some of their concern. And I think it gives the beef industry a great chance to understand more of what it takes to produce beef all the way to the consumer, but everybody knows more about what everybody else's part of that is. And I think that's been a big part of the findings we have. It's not what the findings are, it's the fact that you can share this and people have a better, truer understanding of the people before them and the people after them.
Jeff, I want to go back to one of the specific data points you collected from a carcass standpoint. And obviously we've all heard that carcass weights continue to rise in our industry. Can you tell us more about what you learned about that in this quality audit?
Well, just as you said, it's no surprise that carcass weights are up. In fact, they're up about 30 pounds from 2005, and they're around 825 pounds for an average. The range, if you look at those carcasses, it would be between 600 and 1,000 pounds. About 95% of them fit within that, but we have some outliers that are below that and outliers that are above. But constantly, every time we measure carcass weight, it just keeps getting heavier.
And what kind of challenges does that present, or does it?
Well, when we get feedback from the food service and retail sectors, they've been telling us for years that the carcasses are too big or the cuts are too big and things like that. And it's a challenge because you think about this in the retail sector. The retailers are selling product by the pound, and so you have to have a certain size product that goes to the consumer, and it's priced by the pound, so that's a challenge. In food service, those products are sold on a portion weight basis, so 12 ounce, 6 ounce, whatever it may be. So as the beef industry increases weights, then that continues, to be a challenge to them. Now, over time, we've seen innovative merchandising things that have come about that are trying to, adapt, and we see a whole different way that beef is merchandised today than 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20, or even more than that, to try to reflect this. But it continues to be a message that we hear from the end user is that these cuts keep getting bigger. Now, what do we do with them?
Yeah, interesting. John, what does that mean and what kind of impact does that have on the BQA program itself?
Well, I think it's going to be huge over the next 5 years. And one of the guidance that we received from the strategy team was to do a better job telling our story. Well, that's not just to the consumer. That's a story that has to go all the way up and down the line talking to producers. And I think we've got our directions. What you're hearing here tonight is an overview, a 30,000-foot view of the beef industry. What you have not heard yet is the specifics on specifically what does the retailer say, specifically what does the feeder say. We're going to give you that information over the next year. Every month we're going to have a specific fact sheet. We're going to drill down into this data. There's a huge amount of data here that these guys have collected that we want to share with our industry to let them look specifically at some of these challenges.
And I suspect there are some differences as you get to different segments of the chain as what's most important to them, right?
Well, I think when we started this conversation tonight, we asked, what is the definition of quality? And quality in the pre-harvest side oftentimes is different than in the post-harvest side. So we've got to somehow come together and have a more uniform idea of quality because we do not want to confuse the consumer out there.
That's a good point. And I want to follow up that quality conversation with Keith. You mentioned early on in the program 7 quality categories. So based on the research, as you think about how people purchase calves and feeder calves and fed cattle and beef, what is the #1 quality category?
Well, as a component of this phase 1, and we've never done this before, I mentioned earlier that we conducted an economic experiment. We sort of superimposed it over the interview process. This economic experiment allows us to make some computations that have never been available before. One of those are, what are the probabilities, or what are the odds, that a company that's in the beef supply chain would absolutely require a certain quality attribute before they would make the purchase.
Okay.
The second thing that we were able to compute was, well, if they didn't require something, then if we provided this quality attribute, would they be willing to pay more for it? So we have that information available. But when we made the computations for the odds of what was most likely to be the quality attribute that would be required before they would make a purchase up and down the supply chain, it was how and where the cattle were raised. So interestingly, what that tells us is that everybody in the marketing chain wants more information to be associated with whatever they're buying. And that's different. I already told you earlier that that's different depending on which sector of the industry you're in. So for example, feeders, they want to know more about the health management plans that calves that they're buying were under. Whereas when you get downstream to retailers and food service operators, they want to know more about the animal welfare, the animal well-being. How were the animals treated? Where were they raised? And those sorts of things. Were they raised sustainably? And those are all important attributes that we could attach to the cattle as they move through the supply chain, but they're different pieces of information at each market sector.
So John, is providing this information just the responsibility of the producer, or should all segments be involved in providing this kind of information to consumers?
Our producers are independent minded, and they always have been. But are we total quality management oriented? And if we are, then everybody has to be involved in making sure we provide a quality product. If that packing plant has an injection site blemish, they want to know where that came from, and let's get rid of that. Let's stop that. And that's the good news in this audit, because that's just about gone away. But if on the other hand, that retailer is saying the consumer wants to know how and where these cattle were produced, that has got to go all the way back down the chain. Somebody has got to communicate that information. So it's not just a producer issue, it's everybody in the chain has got to be committed to total quality management in this industry.
That's a great suggestion. Gentlemen, thank you for these insights you've been providing. We'll be back with some final thoughts right after this. Stay with us.
When predicting the genetic merit of young Angus cattle, some genomic tests only give you part of the story. For the most complete and dependable evaluation of genetic potential, with more markers and coverage for economically important traits, there's only one genomic test that won't leave Angus breeders in the dark.
Tough trailers built for tough country. Big Ben Trailers manufactures a different kind of trailer, one that's built to put up with the rough conditions found on the ranch. Rugged build using heavy-gauge powder-coated steel and a 2x4 rectangle tube frame. There's a 1-inch gap between the side and floor, so there's no place for water or manure to accumulate and rust. Big Ben trailers are loaded with standard features: a lever-action hitch, a 3-foot escape gate, and a middle sorting gate, rhino lining along the front edges, and a receiver hitch to tow another trailer, chute, or other equipment. Tough and practical. That's Big Ben Trailers. Designed and built by a working cattleman, you can rely on and trust Big Ben Trailers for their durability and convenient features. Reasonably priced for any rancher to afford. For a list of dealers and other design features, visit BigBenTrailers.com. Big Ben Trailers, built cattlemen tough.
You're not responsible for the weather, just the cattle. And Rangeland works as hard as you do to deliver performance, production, and profitability. Cattle need consistent nutrition. They'll get it year-round with Rangeland products from Land O'Lakes. Deliver what they need free choice in weather-resistant loose minerals and mineral and protein tubs. Get the most out of your forage. See your Land O'Lakes Co-op for products that will stand up to whatever Mother Nature throws at us. Weather's coming in. Rangeland. Consider it done.
There are two things you need to know about Sweet Licks. Number one, they offer a complete line of vitamin, mineral, protein, and medicated nutritional supplements. And number two, they're available in a variety of forms and sizes. What you need, how you need it. For your nearest dealer, just pick up your cone and call 1-87 Licks. That's with an X. Profitability never tasted so sweet.
We know who made that hitch. We know who cut the steel, who milled the ball, and who welded the seams. We know who tested, measured, and checked. We even know who thought the whole thing up. We're B&W, and we know your hitch. Because we don't make them halfway around the world. We make them all right here. B&W. Trusted.
I took part in the making of a video on cattle handling safety put out by Oklahoma State University. It featured several authorities, including the well-respected cattle handling expert, Temple Grandin. The video stressed many recommendations that would seem like common sense to most people, like don't get in the crowding alley afoot, or don't try and ride 3 people on the back of a horse. Well, I was pleased to be part of this fine effort, and I'm sure you can get a copy by calling the college. But when you consider the cowboy mentality, I might have added a few more guidelines that would appear self-explanatory to several people, but maybe not to our cowboys. For instance, never tie the tail of your nose-tongue rope to your belt and then let the cow out of the chute. Never lie down in the bottom of a crowding alley. Never attempt to ride a cow out of a squeeze chute. It leaves a long streak down the middle of your back, I can tell you from personal experience. Do not wear a saber and epaulets while sorting cattle in the alley. Never stand behind a man with a whip. Never drink from a water trough wired with an electric heater that has 3 dead cows laying beside it. And do not grab the funny shaped end of a branding iron. Woo! Do not wear a mask and cape when flanking calves at a branding. Do not try and remove a cud from a masticating bovine. Do not straddle squeeze chute handles or small ruminants. Never stick your hand between the side of the squeeze chute when it is loaded with cow. Do not attempt to bulldog a steer by biting his nose as they let him out of the squeeze chute. Do not attempt to drive livestock with a bow and arrow. And avoid falling asleep while doing a rectal exam on a cow. And finally, steer clear of stuff labeled danger, caution, or cowboys at work. This is Baxter Black with some cattle handling safety tips from out there.
Welcome back as we wrap up this week's edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. Now, before we go, we wanted to get some final thoughts from the experts about what's next on the National Beef Quality Audit. And Jason, let's start with you.
Yeah, I wanted to recognize the fact that many of the improvements I think we've seen in this audit versus the one in 1991 in the last 20 years, I think can be credited to the National Beef Quality Assurance Program. And it's been around for longer than 1991. And we saw in this audit surveys from producers saying health is important, cattle handling is important, and those are fundamental aspects of the Beef Quality Assurance Program. So to think moving forward how much we could accomplish, especially in the past, we've been funded on a very limited shoestring budget. I think if we could fund this program fully, it could be amazing.
Jeff, what would you add?
Well, each year, each time we do the National Beef Quality Audit, you bring together this whole group of people that usually are not fully aligned. So cattle producers and feeders and packers and retailers and food service. And now you have a chance to share information and for people to learn more about what the other group does. And I think the findings are almost less important than it is the fact that you got people talking, and you got people talking about the importance of the quality audit and what's the information, and using any of the findings from one sector to the next. I think it's been a very important part of what we do.
Very good. Keith, what would you add?
One of our most important objectives, I believe, is to identify ways that we can improve demand for beef and therefore improve profitability for all sectors of the beef industry. And I think we've once again done that by identifying food safety and eating satisfaction as hugely important demand drivers. We just need to go out and all of us be more proactive in terms of telling the story of how we produce beef to the general public.
And John, what would you add?
Well, this project would not have occurred without the support of the Beef Checkoff, and so we really need to thank them for doing that. We have our marching orders now. The marching orders are, guys, do not give an inch when it comes to product integrity, eating satisfaction, and above all, you got to tell your story, and that starts with a seed stock and goes all the way to the consumer. So those are our marching orders for the next 5 years.
Very good. Thank you all again for sharing your insights today. For more information about the National Beef Quality Audit funded by the Beef Checkoff, just visit our website at bqa.org. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. Join us right back here next week on RFD TV.